much has been made of the Star Trek franchise's first ever explicitly gay cast members. I mean, they're literally played by queer stars Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz on Star Trek Discovery. You really can't get much more gay than two guys who were in the original run of Rent. I mean, honestly, they finally got what they wished because there's no rent to pay in the Federation. It's actually surprising that the Star Trek The Next Generation inspired and Seth MacFarlane created series The Orville, which airs during prime time on Fox, hasn't made a similar splash by the inclusion of Bortus, a male character happily married to and raising a child with another male character. We don't often get to see gay parents on TV shows, and especially on Fox during prime time. And it's also surprising considering Bortus is almost a textbook definition of a bear. Yet certainly, while The Orville isn't part of a 50-year-long franchise, the fact that LGBT representation still has a long way to go, even in science fiction and on primetime, makes the lack of attention to Bortus surprising. Despite garnering interest and fan praise for its gender, transgender, and intersex-focused storyline in its third episode of Season 1, The Orville's LGBTQ representation has gone largely unnoticed. But perhaps there is a reason for the lack of attention. Is it possible that Bortus isn't actually gay? Okay. Before you all jump down in the comment section to scream at me, "Of course he's gay, you twat!" I actually do think it's an important question to ask ourselves, because I think it gets at the heart of what it means to queer people to see ourselves represented on screen, and what it means to be gay. Yet before I get to the larger philosophical themes at play here, let's get into the idea of how we can even make a case that Bortus isn't gay at all. In the very first episode of The Orville, we learn that Bortus is a Macfarlane, an alien species that only has a single gender.
Your entire species is male, isn't it?
That is correct, sir.
So there's probably not a lot of arguments about leaving the toilet seat up and that kind of thing, right?
No. Macfarlanes urinate only once per year.
So if a species only has a single gender to begin with, can someone from that species actually be gay? Okay, I immediately know that all of you Orville fans are yelling at the screen right now.
Come on, we learned in the third episode that Macfarlanes aren't exactly single-gendered. Hashtag not a real fan.
First off, wow, you're a very angry hypothetical viewer. I think we all need to relax with a jar of pickles. See, that's a reference. Second, you are 100% correct. In the episode About a Girl, we discovered that 1 in every 1,000 Macfarlanes are actually born female. In fact, Bortus' one child, as well as his partner Kriton, were both born female. While an approximate 50-50 split between sexes in humans is seen as natural, in Macfarlane society, female births are viewed similar to intersex children in human society, in that they are, incorrectly, viewed as abnormal and needing of correction. At the end of the episode, Bortus' child is forced to undergo surgery to make them align with a male sex, a fact that still haunts Bortus to this day. So while certainly not common, Bortus' species does indeed have more than one gender. Which would make my original question, can someone be gay if their species only has one gender, to be moot. However, let's take the idea of a single gender species at face value. If Macfarlanes were truly single gender, are they still gay? Well, the American Psychiatric Association defines homosexuality as, quote, an enduring pattern of emotional, romantic, and/or sexual attractions to people of the same sex. Under that definition, we find that Bortus is actually still gay. Despite only having one sex to be attracted to within a species, Bortus is regardless still attracted to the same sex, and obviously has an enduring emotional, romantic, and sexual attraction to that sex. Additionally, the fact that Bortus theoretically could date other sexes and other gender identities from species around the Union or the Orville shows that Bortus still exhibits an attraction to the same sex. So yes, scientifically, Bortus is 100% homosexual. Huzzah, Bortus! Welcome to the community. Rainbow flags are this way, and you'll receive a copy of our political agenda in the mail. So I'm sure you've guessed that the fact that there is still more video means that there is more to think about this. Indeed, I think there's a larger philosophical question that Bortus brings up, because I think his unique situation brings up the question of what do people in the LGBTQ community expect and hope to see from a queer representation on screen. In other words, while Bortus scientifically is homosexual, is he actually gay on an artistic level? And no, I don't mean to ask if Bortus is about to go star in Rent. You see, there's actually a second definition or part of what it means to be homosexual. The Supreme Court has also defined being homosexual as, quote, a person's sense of identity based on those attractions, related behaviors, and membership in a community of others who also share those attractions. Part of being gay, or any part of the LGBTQ world, is the sense of community that one builds with others in the community. Now, not everyone in the LGBTQ community feels a sense of community. Some feel like they don't want to be part of it. Some people can be part of it just because of their situation. But predominantly, LGBTQ folks have built a sense of shared community, and even sub-communities such as leather, BDSM, or butch communities. We have taken on certain iconographies and images. I mean, I'm pretty sure that 95% of sales of rainbow paraphernalia and glitter is from the gay community, and the other 5% is from kindergarten art teachers, who also are probably gay. Indeed, we have had to find a sense of community with each other because, historically, LGBTQ people have faced constant discrimination, harassment, and violence from society at large, from both individuals, the larger community, or governments. Even today, while LGBTQ awareness, acceptance, and rights have certainly generally improved over the years, there are still many battles to be won, particularly in the case of transgender people. LGBTQ people were forced to join together in order to both work together to fight against oppression, as well as find solace, love, acceptance, and freedom of expression amongst ourselves. Yet, one cannot deny that our sense of community is in part created by the discrimination directed at us. So when we look at Bortus, obviously, there is no denying that while he is technically gay, and even feels a sense of community with Macfarlane culture. I mean, the dude takes part in a yearly urination ritual, which, okay, is pretty queer. Bortus has clearly never had to face oppression for his sexual orientation. And in that way, I wonder if Bortus actually gives us true gay representation. Okay, I still hear you, random YouTube commenter.
Bortus's lack of facing oppression is the point. The Orville and Star Trek, for that matter, has always been about showing a positive version of the future where we all work together in harmony and actually care about each other without regard to our differences of identity or opinion. Idiot.
Right, you are. But I think this is the point where comparing the Orville to Star Trek Discovery might be apt. Star Trek Discovery, as I previously mentioned, gave us our first explicitly gay characters in the Trek franchise. And what's important to note is that, like Bortus, no one on the crew of the Discovery finds their sexuality strange or worth noting. Both Stamets and Culber just live their lives and openly display their relationship without worry. And what's even more important to note is that they are both human. As Star Trek takes place in a supposed version of humanity's future, that leads us to understand that by the 23rd century, being gay, and most likely and hopefully the rest of the LGBTQ community, has just become a normal and accepted part of the diverse tapestry of humanity. It says that humanity has and can overcome its worst impulses to hate and otherize in order to love and accept. It's why I think gay representation in Star Trek Discovery is way more impactful than Bortus in the Orville. It's not to say Bortus isn't gay, but I think it's not as impactful. Now, that's not saying which characters or shows have better storylines or writings. We could argue the merits of each, but just conceptually and philosophically, Star Trek Discovery's representation works better for me. While both Stamets and Bortus are gay men who face zero discrimination or hatred from their respective crewmates, as a Macfarlane, Bortus has never had to overcome discrimination, at least as far as we know based on their society. And as both Orville and Star Trek seem to be attempting to make social messages, I think Bortus doesn't work as well at representing a larger message about LGBTQ acceptance. So I actually wrote and shot this video before the recent Season 2 episode Deflectors aired, and Deflectors actually focused directly on the issue of sexuality in Macfarlane society, and somewhat proved my point here. In Deflectors, celebrated Macfarlane engineer and Bortus' ex Lokar comes aboard the Orville and secretly reveals his attraction to Lieutenant Tayla Kayla, a woman. The problem is Macflanes are a predominantly male race, and Lokar's attraction to a woman is condemned by and illegal in Macfarlane society. After kissing Talia, Lokar's sexuality is discovered by Kriton, and Kriton promises to report Lokar to the Macfarlane government. Lokar fakes his own death and frames Kriton, but in the end his deception is discovered, and Lokar is convinced to face punishment rather than let a quote-unquote innocent man face charges. Our final glimpse of Lokar finds him being dragged out of a Macfarlane courthouse in cuffs. So this basically proves my point about Bortus. In Bortus' society, he has never had to face oppression as a gay man. However, it's clear that straight sexuality is very much both stigmatized and illegal in Macfarlane society. So here, the Orville writers use a straight character to talk about queer oppression. And while one could argue that it centers straight people at the expense of queer characters,
It also speaks to what the Orville's goal is versus Star Trek Discovery. The Orville writers assume that their viewers need to learn about the LGBTQ community. The show even evokes real-world oppression by having Lokar's murder take place in a virtual simulation of 1940s New York City, a time and era well known to be hostile toward the LGBTQ community. By ending on a dark note, the episode hopes to inspire its audience to reflect on real-world prejudices and how they need to be stopped, and mirrors how they did that before in the Season 1 episode about a girl. The Orville attempts to teach its lesson by centering straight-looking relationships. Lorak isn't oppressed for being a man who loves another man. He is oppressed for being a man who loves a woman. While this makes sense in universe, the oppression of a straight-seeming character comes across as saying to a straight audience, how would you feel if it was you who had to face this type of situation? The Orville writers assume that most of their audience needs to learn this and that they are mostly straight, or have never met an LGBTQ person. Meanwhile, over on Discovery, the writers create episodes assuming that their audience either is queer or openly accepts queer people already. Discovery doesn't try to preach to or teach its audience that gay people should be part of a hopeful future. Instead, LGBTQ folks just exist in Starfleet, earning the same respect, admiration, and opportunities as anyone else. Now, I'm not necessarily saying one approach is better than the other. The Orville's lesson of how queer oppression needs to be eliminated is still sadly relevant today, with LGBTQ rights and issues still being very much politicized and debated. But conversely, Discovery actually allows queer people to see ourselves living harmoniously in a utopian future that respects diversity of identity and remains steadfastly focused on hope and exploration. As a queer person myself who finds herself inspired every time Culber and Stamets on Discovery get to celebrate their love, I need that type of story for myself now more than ever. It's also worth noting that both the Orville and Discovery's LGBTQ storylines focused on the supposed death and resurrection of gay characters. Despite both shows taking place in futuristic utopias, it appears that gay characters still can't escape the specter of death. The bury your gays trope, where LGBT characters are ultimately killed off because they can't be given happy endings, is frustrating, and it's sad that LGBTQ viewers still have to deal with the trauma of watching ourselves die. It's a common frustration that LGBTQ viewers have become all too accustomed to with our on-screen representation, and it's a trope that both shows' writing teams appear to have been all too aware of, with both the Orville and Discovery refusing to commit to the decision to kill off a queer character, with Lorak on Orville and Culber on Discovery having their deaths reversed ultimately. Alright, that's my quick little sidetrack from my original version of this video. Back to the original.
That's not to say his representation isn't important, because Bortus and the Macfarlane race does something that Star Trek Discovery doesn't. Bortus, and more specifically his child storyline, actually gives a good voice to the intersex community, a community that so rarely gets on-screen representation, and even less than the LGBTQ community. Bortus' child Topa was born female, but as females are seen as an abnormality that must be corrected, Topa was forced to undergo surgery to make their genitals match the gender identity of man assigned to them by Macfarlane society. This mirrors exactly how intersex people are viewed as abnormal because their bodies or genetics don't match with our binary view of male or female genitals or genetics. Notice I didn't say transgender community, which is distinctly different from the intersex community, though there is a lot of overlap between the two. If Bortus' child later decides to transition to be a woman in a future episode, that would be a transgender storyline, making them both trans and intersex. But as it stands, we can only view them as an intersex character. In any case, this gives the Orville a wonderful chance to explore what intersex people go through in a way few shows have done before. In grand Star Trek tradition, they're showing us an alien race so we can move our biases off of humanity and just explore the concept. And I'm glad they seem to be continuing this storyline, as it has come up a few times in Season 2 so far. Also, how fast do Macfarlanes age? Topa's literally a teenager now. Weren't they born like a year ago? Like, it literally looks like they're going to be dumped at prom by next week. In the end, even if we disregard the wonderful intersex representation and the fact that Bortus' gay identity may not be as philosophically effective as its Star Trek counterparts, obviously Bortus being gay still matters. Within the world of the show, he's a high-ranking officer on a military ship who openly displays and discusses his sexuality, with little to no major qualms from his fellow officers. He garners the exact same amount of respect as his straight or other identified counterparts. And to see a main character on a primetime TV show, especially on Fox, still matters today, No matter how far we think that LGBT rights have advanced, representation matters. Not just so that we can show a future where diversity and difference are not only accepted but celebrated, but to inspire those living today to make that future possible. That's it for this video. If you liked this video and you want to see more delving into the Orville, Star Trek, or other geek or queer topics, or videos about queer and transgender issues, or even better, videos about the intersection of the geek and queer worlds, please check out my channel and give a subscribe. I have a ton of new videos already and release new ones each and every Friday, and sometimes more per week. Until next time, thanks so much for watching.